You're listening to Trace Hunt Radio. We explore the darkest chapters of true crime, unsolved mysteries, cold cases, and the twisted minds behind them. Follow the blood, chase the clues, uncover the truth. Stay sharp, the hunt begins now. London, June 1892. The gas lamps of Lambeth cast quivering halos on rain-slicked cobblestones, but their light never seems enough to drive back the darkness that clings to the narrow backstreets. Here in the heart of the city's poorest quarter, the tenements rise like jagged teeth against the night sky, and the air is thick with the smell of coal smoke and despair. It is in this labyrinth of looming walls and flickering lamps that the first body is discovered. At 3:30 on a Monday morning, Constable Edward Briers answers a cry from the keeper of the Rose and Crown lodging house. He finds on the alley floor the crumpled form of a woman named Eliza Ward, 25 years old, a seamstress by day, and by necessity an occasional visitor to the district's more disreputable establishments by night. She lies on her back, arms splayed wide, in a shallow pool of dark, congealed blood. Though the blade wound at her throat is brutal, precisely severing the large veins without tearing the flesh beyond neat surgical cuts, there is something almost reverent about its placement. Constance Rose, the lodging keeper, later swears she saw a single black rose petal pressed gently against Eliza's collarbone, as though laid there by careful hands. Constable Briers notes three curious details. Eliza's body shows no sign of a struggle. Her hands are unmarked, and her cloak is folded neatly beneath her. The alley's grime bears only one set of footprints, dainty and unshod, as though Eliza herself led the way, along the edge of the gutter. Briar thin scratches form a series of broken circles, a pattern reminiscent of old folk ritual, symbols that no one in Lambeth speaks of without a shiver. By dawn, news of the killing has spread through the district. Newspaper cries of Black Rose murder appear in droves, half-truths, sensationalism, rumors of ritual sacrifice. Yet behind every headline, one question refuses to fade. Who would leave a flower at the throat of a prostitute and vanish without a trace? 2 weeks later, another body is found. This time the victim is Mary Hawkins, 32, known among locals for her bright laugh and resilience in the face of grinding poverty. She is discovered slumped against the side of an abandoned warehouse on Millbank Road, her mourning shawl wrapped in immaculate folds, her hands folded across her chest. Lionel Finch, the coroner, examines her wound by lantern light. He murmurs to Constable Briers, anatomical precision. Briers, the incision spares the face entirely, removes the carotid section with clinical accuracy. This was no common street thug, doctor. Finch holds up a folded scrap of paper, a single black rose stencil, traced in a deliberate hand, its petals curling inward in a circle barely closed. The footprints return, the same small, bare impressions fading into the warehouse floorboards, then disappearing. No marks show where the killer exited, and like before, a single black rose petal rests on Mary's chest, no blood upon its wax soft texture. Inspector Arthur Mallory of Scotland Yard is dispatched to oversee the case. He arrives at dawn, trench coat damp from fog, hat pulled low. He interviews Constable Briers and Dr. Finch, carefully reviewing every note and sketch. His sharp eyes flick to the tiny flowers and the geometric scratches. That symbol, he says, tracing the broken circle on the coroner's sketchpad. It's old, centuries old. I saw something like it in occult texts once. A talisman for binding vengeance. Mallory orders Briers to scour the lodging houses, the workhouses, every florist and street vendor in Lambeth, in search of black roses or similar imagery. He tasks Dr. Finch to preserve every petal, every scrap of paper, and demands footcast experts to capture the mysterious barefoot prints. Meanwhile, local patrols increase in the dead hours. Women of the night are escorted home by multiples rather than walking alone. But fear persists. Street vendors whisper of a phantom butcher, Who stalks the alleys harvesting roses of blood? Mothers clutch their children tighter, and even hardened criminals pause at the thought of midnight visits. On July 5th, the third body appears Ann Porter, 28, in the shadow of a shuttered bakery near Lambeth Bridge. Ryers and Mallory arrive to find her propped against the rough bricks, as though seated on an invisible bench. Her neatly pleated skirt is uncreased, her gloves still pristine. The carnage is minimal, a single incision at the throat, the wound as tidy as a tailor's hem. Mallory stoops to inspect the immediate area. He locates the same delicate footprints leading in, only now they are sprinkled with flour dust from a nearby bakery. The pattern in the dust is the familiar circle, broken at one point. He pictures that break as an opening a gateway. This time, the black rose petal is perched beneath Anne's chin, its stem tucked carefully under her collar. The petal's edges are blacker than night. Mallory encloses it in a small box, labeling it Exhibit C. Back in the yard office, Mallory pins all 3 crime scene photographs to a board. Eliza Ward, Fallon in Rounds Alley, Mary Hawkins at the Millbank warehouse, and Porter near Lambeth Bridge. He connects them with red string. Noting the dates and locations form a perfect triangle across the district. In the center lies Winter's End Pub, where Mallory drinks stout each week. He circles the pub and the bakery in chalk on the map a potential meeting place, or perhaps the killer's lair. Dr. Finch arrives with medical records. Each victim was seen alive the previous night at the hospital's free clinic, complaining of sore throats or minor ailments. Each was released in the early hours. Finch suggests the killer might be a medical professional, someone with legitimate access to scalpels and anatomical knowledge, a person whose bedside manner masks something far more sinister. Mallory rubs his chin. A doctor or surgeon on the margins, perhaps a disgraced practitioner or a charlatan. We must question staff, review recent dismissals. On July 10th, a 4th package arrives at Scotland Yard addressed to Mallory in a thick envelope. No return address. Inside is a childlike sketch of a broken circle, and beneath it, in spidery script, Petal 4, the debt is paid. No petal accompanies the note this time, but Mallory recognizes the urgency. He posts extra patrols around hospitals and lodging houses. He orders constables to stop and question any barefoot individuals loitering near crime scenes. But the killer remains unseen. As the summer stretches on, the city seethes with speculation. The newspapers take to calling the murderer the Black Rose Reaper. Criminologists debate motives. Spiritualists claim the killings serve dark rituals. Street commune whisper the Reaper feeds on the city's blood. Inside Scotland Yard, Mallory studies the map late into the night, candle burning low. He realizes the triangles formed by the crime scenes overlay a pattern on the Thames, an ancient glyph visible only when mapped precisely. He traces a line to the oldest churchyard in Lambeth, where the rumored execution of a witch occurred more than a century ago. He leans back, heart pounding. He senses he is homing in on a truth that blends history, vengeance, and the grim realities of Victorian London. Outside, gas lamps gutter in the fog. Somewhere in those shadows, the Reaper prepares his next bloom. Mallory straightens, gathers his coat, and steels himself. Soon, he murmurs, "I will cut off your bloom." Inspector Arthur Mallory arrives at Scotland Yard before dawn. Lantern in hand and clay cast of the 3rd fingerprint tucked beneath his coat. He convenes a small war room meeting with Sergeant Helen Carter, Dr. Lionel Finch, and Constable Edward Briers. On a large oak table, Mallory spreads out the growing dossier, maps of Lambeth, photos of the 3 victims, the broken circle sketches, and the ominous letter announcing Petal 4. Dr. Finch, Mallory says, lowering his voice. The coroner's report suggests a skilled hand. Further analysis. Finch nods gravely. Each incision is anatomically precise, delivered with minimal force, the carotid artery severed cleanly, without crushing surrounding tissue. Whoever wields that blade has surgical training, or at least meticulous practice with anatomical dissection. Carter picks up a meager handful of shards from the latest broken circle, found near in Porter's body. This enamel-painted floor tile came from the local cancer hospice on Brook Street. They replaced it last year. The only buyer on record was Dr. Edmund Hale. Mallory frowns. Doctor, Hale, recently dismissed under suspicion of unethical experimentation, resides on the outskirts of the district. We'll interview him today. Briars points to a ledger open to the page listing free clinic visits. All 3 victims attended the clinic: Eliza, Mary, and complaining of sore throats and insomnia. Hale held evening hours until his termination. Mallory's jaw tightens. He taps the ledger. It appears the killer used the clinic to mark victims, then stalked them in the dark. The envelopes containing petals always arrived at Scotland Yard, but the petals themselves only at crime scenes. He circles Dr. Hale's address on the map, a modest brick townhouse with iron bars on the windows. Let's move. At 10:30, Mallory, Carter, and Briars stand outside Dr. Hale's door. An ominous hush hangs in the air. Mallory knocks, no answer. Carter examines the ground, powdery flour dust, and muddy boot prints matching the broken circle pattern intersect at the threshold. Briars kicks the door. It creaks shut, but yields to a second blow. Inside, the parlor is in disarray. Overturned chairs, books strewn across the floor, and a shattered vase of black roses artificial. Their wax petals scattered among the splinters. Carter collects one petal, her face pale. Someone planned to remove evidence hastily, she murmurs. A single bar of candle wax lies half melted in the fireplace, its color identical to that used at the crime scenes. Mallory moves to the clinic ledger, now torn from Hale's office. He flips through entries, late-night consultations, coded notations, and 3 cases marked in red: Ward, Hawkins, Porter. Next to each name, a sketched rose and the scribbled letter X. His pulse quickens. They search the study. Beneath a loose floorboard, Carter uncovers a battered leather trunk. Mallory pries it open. Inside are surgical instruments, scalpels, bone saws, forceps all meticulously cleaned. A tattered medical journal sits atop them, its pages stained. Mallory reads a passage. I have mastered the blade's kiss. Blood becomes art, when guided by purpose. Briars jams a handcuff on Mallory's wrist. Inspector, sir. Footprints on the hearth, I found them leading to the back door. They stop there. Across the room, a back staircase leads to Hale's laboratory. Carter shines her lamp up the steep steps. Mallory casts one glance at the instruments, then follows her. The laboratory door resists at first, then swings inward to reveal rows of wax specimens and a marble pedestal supporting a locked glass case. Within lies a single black rose in formaldehyde, its petals curled as though petrified in a scream. Mallory steps closer. On a bench, he finds fragments of torn letters matching those sent to Scotland Yard. He lifts them. This is his signature. A faint creak signals footsteps upstairs. Carter trains her torch on the stairwell as a hush fills the air. A tall figure in a dark coat stands at the top, face obscured. They hold a scalpel. Mallory draws his service revolver. Dr. Edmund Hale, you're under arrest for the murders of 5 women and suspected of conspiring in these atrocities. The figure tilts their head. The inspector notices rough hands, layers of chalk dust beneath the nails, likely from tile glazing at the hospice. Hale's gloves are missing and the footprints downstairs were bare. A single faint impression of toes appears in the dust on the lab floor. Hale steps forward, raising the scalpel. You know nothing of art, Inspector. These petals, these wounds, they are symphonies. I release what the world refuses to see. Carter grips her truncheon. Put it down. Hale smiles with cold intensity. You cannot comprehend beauty born of suffering. He gestures to the case. Look at my muse. Mallory approaches the formaldehyde rose. He sees a second glass vial at its base filled with a dark, viscous fluid, solvent. He whispers to Finch, summoned seconds later. He preserves his relics. A sudden crash reverberates downstairs. Briars calls up, Sir. They're smashing in the front door. Hale spins, abandoning the scalpel on the desk, and bolts through a hidden side exit, an underground passage Mallory had overlooked. Before Mallory can give chase, Hale disappears into shadows beyond the lab's window. Back in the front parlor, Mallory orders Carmichael, his sergeant, to secure the hospital and every lodging house within a mile radius. Carter seals the instruments and evidence bags. Finch collects the formaldehyde rose and the fluid for toxicology. Briars guards the ledger, and The scattered petals. In the yard outside Hale's townhouse, Mallory confronts the smashed vase of black roses. He's escaped, but he left the artery of his plan exposed tonight. He kneels, gathering wax petals and splintered pottery shards. We have motive, method, and the man who penned the letters. Now we must recover him. Mallory stands beneath the broken gas lamp, its sputtering light flickering ghastly shadows across Hale's doorstep. He writes a final note in his casebook. Dr. Edmund Hale identified as prime suspect. Surgical instruments and journal confirm signature. MO suspect escaped via subterranean tunnel. Pursuit ongoing. Custody of informant awaiting. Discovery of tunnel exit. Vigilance required. He gazes down Millbank Road toward the river, somewhere in the fog. Hale slips through Lambeth's maze, preparing his next masterpiece. Mallory tucks his notebook away, determination in every line of his face. The hunt resumes. The dock of the Old Bailey is thick with tension in late September 1892. Thames mist seeps through the high windows, chilling the courtroom as spectators fill the benches. Pressmen, socialites, and curious onlookers drawn by headlines blaring the Black Rose Reaper. At the center stands Dr. Edmund Hale, gaunt and composed, his dark eyes fixed on the judge's bench. Beside him, his defense counsel, Mr. Archibald Sinclair, straightens his cravat, while across the aisle, Crown Prosecutor Sarah Whitaker ranges her papers. Detective Inspector Arthur Mallory and Sergeant Helen Carter slip in behind a cluster of constables. Mallory's keen gaze sweeps the room, the coroner's exhibit cabinet on one side, displaying black rose petals encased in glass, the judge's gavel poised like a verdict unsaid. The jury box, where 12 faces range from stern disapproval to curious fascination. Prosecutor Whitaker rises first, voice measured yet forceful. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, 5 women were lured from their beds, led into the darkest hours of Lambeth's backstreets, and executed with surgical precision. At each scene you will recall a single black rose, petal staged as a signature, a warning, a mockery. Dr. Edmund Hale, once a man of science, stands accused of these vile acts. We shall prove his guilt beyond doubt by his instruments, his writings, and the testimony of those who chased his shadow. A murmur ripples through the gallery. Hale remains impassive, his fingers steepled against his chest. Sinclair leans forward to address the jury. Gentlemen and ladies, my client is a healer, not a killer. Yes, he owns surgical tools, but they are no proof of murder. The petals were procured by many, the circle symbol known in local folklore, and yet no witness places Dr. Hale at any crime scene. Doubt, not drama, must guide your verdict. The first to testify is Dr. Lionel Finch. Under Whitaker's direct questioning, he recounts the wound's precision and the presence of chemical solvent with formula X189. Finch holds up the formaldehyde-preserved black rose. This, Exhibit H, was found in Dr. Hale's laboratory, alongside instruments identical to the murder weapon. On cross-examination, Sinclair subtly highlights Finch's career setbacks, disciplinary hearings for experimental methods. Finch's composure falters, but he insists these findings stand apart from any personal disputes. Sergeant Helen Carter follows. She recounts the raid on Hale's home, the ledger of patients matching the victims' names, and the clay tile fragment from the hospice bearing cold traces of brimstone, and ritual wax when challenged on chain of custody. Carter produces witness signatures for every transfer. The jury nods in quiet acknowledgement. Constable Edward Briers presents the plaster cast of the footprints. From the lab, bare toes identical to those at the crime scenes. Sinclair probes, isn't it possible someone could have borrowed Dr. Hale's lab keys or worn similar boots barefoot? Briers shakes his head. No civilian could access the locked lab without his passphrase. Sinclair rises to call the first defense witness, Mrs. Agnes Price, Hale's housekeeper. She testifies that Hale returned home on each murder night before dawn, exhausted and pale. He was here, sir, with me until the cock crowed. Under gentle prodding, she recalls Hale's private grief over his late wife, refuting any suggestion of malice. Next, Sinclair calls Dr. Samuel Withers, a retired surgeon, who speaks to Hale's reputation. A man of compassion, Withers declares, I taught him anatomy. His hands saved lives. Whitaker challenges Withers on his old boy ties, but the jury seems swayed by his earnest tone. The courtroom quietly buzzes as Whitaker presents a torn journal page Hale's handwriting. The blade must dance, petals conceal the debt. Sinclair objects, claiming the page is unverified. Mallory, summoned to the stand, testifies about in-laboratory handwriting samples matching the fragment. The judge admits it as Exhibit J. Sinclair counters by calling forensic analyst Mr. Tobias Gray, who stresses the possibility of forged pages. He carefully demonstrates how age and ink composition can be manipulated. Mallory, pressed by Whitaker, concedes only that forgery would require access to Hale's private papers, something not impossible for a determined conspirator. Carter reappears to challenge Mrs. Price's timeline. You say you saw Dr. Hale until dawn, yet your own clock stopped it to 17 a.m. with a trembling voice. Mrs. Price admits the clock is old and prone to stopping a detail that further muddles her credibility. Sinclair zeroes in on the circle symbol. Inspector, you believed it a cult. Isn't it just a child's graffiti, repeated across many walls in this district? Mallory responds. Only one hand carved it in mud. One hand I traced to Dr. Hale's back garden. He produces mud-stained gloves lifted from Hale's. Washing a direct link. Prosecutor Whitaker leans forward, voice resonant. We have motive Edmund Hale's debts. His bitterness over lost respect and means. The surgical skill and unique solvent. We have his signature on letters taunting this court, and his implements found in his lab. One man choreographed 5 deaths, hid behind superstition and ritual, thinking he could escape justice. That man is Dr. Edmund Hale. Sinclair rises in full confidence. You have heard allegations, hints, and conjecture, but no living witness saw my client strike a death blow. No direct evidence places him in those alleys. In a just society, we cannot convict on shadows and speculation. We must acquit unless proof is absolute. The jury withdraws for deliberation. The courtroom hush deepens as minutes stretch to an hour. Mallory stands, silent and composed, flanked by Carter and Briers. They share determined glances. At last, the jury files back. The foreman rises. We, the jury, find the defendant Dr. Edmund Hale guilty on 3 counts of accessory to murder, and not guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Gasps ripple through the gallery. Hale's face remains impassive. Sinclair bows his head. Judge Sir Reginald Farnsworth pronounces sentence. 20 years penal servitude for accessory, citing insufficient proof of direct slaying, but acknowledging complicity in concealing and facilitating the murders. Hale is led away, the clicking of manacles echoing like distant thunder outside. Thames fog drifts along the riverbank, shrouding the night in mystery once more. Mallory steps onto the courthouse steps. He lights his pipe, the embers glowing bright in the gloom. Carter approaches, coat dusted with autumn leaves. He's punished, but not for everything. Carter murmurs. Mallory nods. We lack the final piece confirmation. He struck those blows himself. But we expose his shadow, and that's justice enough for now. He stares across the misty street where the first petals fell. In the distance, a solitary figure moves among the tombstones of an old churchyard barefoot, leaving tiny prints in the wet grass before fading into the mist. Mallory draws in a breath. Onto the next, before the petals bloom again. Autumn's chill deepens, as Detective Inspector Arthur Mallory returns to the fog-shrouded streets of Lambeth, determined to unearth the true architect behind the Black Rose Reaper's horrors. Dr. Edmund Hale's conviction for accessory offered partial justice, but Mallory remains haunted by the knowledge that the man who pressed the blade remains at large. Tonight, the hunt resumes. Mallory meets Sergeant Helen Carter at the deserted Lambeth Hospital, where the first victims were treated. The wards lie empty, corridors echoing with the drip of long-abandoned IVs. The killer used the clinic to mark his prey, Mallory murmurs, tracing the tile pattern on the floor beneath a flickering gas lamp. We need to find who could move between medical wards and lodging houses unseen. Carter's torch beam lands on a utility panel ajar near the corridor ceiling. She pries it open and reveals a narrow service duct. This leads directly to the morgue. She whispers, someone with keys could slip through here. They crouch and slip through the duct, the metal surfaces cold against their palms. Below, Mallory spots boot print dust on the morgue floor, flour residue. He notes, matching the bakery dust found near in Porter's scene. He photographs the prints and follows. Then toward the mortuary cold room. Inside, he finds a small leather pouch pinned beneath a mortuary table. Within are 6 silk thorns, exact replicas of the black rose petals, each tipped with a single drop of the solvent, used to erase blood from Hale's instruments. Mallory's breath hitches. He's here, he says, softly. Tonight, he's in Lambeth. Meanwhile, Maria Hawkins Mary's sister visits the bishop at St. Mary's Church to demand closure. She points to a crudely carved symbol on a pew arm, the broken circle. The bishop, Reverend Jonathan Crane. Pales, I thought those marks were vandalism, he admits, but Father Whitfield claimed they were protective sigils to ward off evil. Father Whitfield, Maria's voice trembles. The parish priest, Crane nods. He arrived 6 months ago. He has a fascination with old superstitions. Maria races into the night to Mallory's side. It's him, she gasps. Father Whitfield knows the rituals. Mallory furrows his brow. If Crane's right, we've misjudged a spiritual advisor for security instead of suspicion. He recalls Whitfield's presence at every candle vigil, every survivor's prayer. We need to confront him. Reeves, Carter, and Briars converge at St. Mary's under a waning half-moon. The churchyard is silent, tombstones leaning like whispered secrets. Mallory steps onto the worn stone steps. The massive oak door creaks as he pushes it open. Inside, the nave sits in moonlit shadow. The organ's silent and the hymnals closed. At the altar, Father Whitfield stands beside a row of black wax candles melting into twisted shapes. He turns, robes swishing, face bathed in pale light. Detective Inspector, he intones, voice even. I wondered when you would arrive. Mallory assesses him, dark eyes gleaming with unsettling calm. Your interest in protective rights borders on obsession, Mallory says. But these murders were never about protection. They were declarations of vengeance. Whitfield inclines his head. Vengeance against those who sin against the innocent. He gestures to the candles. 6 souls were taken, 6 souls must atone. Carter steps forward. The broken circle, the bare footprints, the petals in the morgue. This was your doing. You staged the killings as ritual, then directed suspicion towards superstition. Whitfield's lips curve. I guided the Reaper's hand, but I did not kill. You provided the script. Mallory counters, and only someone with access to medical records, to keys, and to the solvent could facilitate those murders. Whitfield's gaze flickers toward the sacristy. Door, you seek him. Mallory draws his revolver. Yes. Carter and Briars secure the main hall as Mallory stalks toward the sacristy. He throws the door open. The room is cluttered with vestments and ancient chalices, but in the center stands a heavy oak chest bound in iron. Mallory picks the lock with practiced ease. Inside lie letters, receipts, and a tattered hospital key ring marked morgue, the very one used to access the ducts. He pockets the keys and whirls as a figure steps from the shadows, Reverend Crane. Priest turned accomplice, face pale, hands gripping a ceremonial dagger. You discovered too soon. Crane hisses. Mallory backs away. This ends tonight. Carter and Briars surgeon. Carter seizes the dagger arm. Briars presses handcuffs on Crane's wrists. Crane struggles, eyes wild. He must finish the ritual. He shrieks. At that moment, the church organ groans to life upstairs, the single note echoing like a death knell. Mallory's gaze sharpens. Whitfield, he calls. Father Whitfield stands at the organ bench, fingers poised above keys. He waits. Whitfield murmurs. In the crypt, Mallory follows Whitfield down a narrow stair to the crypt beneath the church. The air grows damp, and the lantern's glow catches on stone sarcophagi. At the end of the corridor, he sees a barred door. Whitfield unlocks it with a silver key. Inside, 6 burial niches form a semicircle. At their center stands a simple wooden table. On it lie the scalpel and the broken circle stencil evidence that Crane used to train the real killer. Mallory's heart pounds when he spots a tall figure in the deepest niche, bound and hooded. Unmask him, Mallory orders. Whitfield pulls back the hood. The The murderer is the hospital's former porter, Samuel Vance's gaunt face hollow, eyes burning with fanatic zeal. He meets Mallory's gaze, unflinching. Vance's voice cracks. I followed the ritual you all mocked. I cut away the rot from society. He spits blood-tinged foam. I was nothing, until he guided me. Mallory's eyes flick to Whitfield. You used Vance as your blade, and Crane as your witness. But why? Whitfield kneels beside Vance. Because vengeance is a garden that thrives on sacrifice. He lays a gentle hand on Vance's shoulder. You sowed the seed, I nurtured the bloom. Vance's body convulses, and he collapses half unconscious. Carter steps forward, cuffing him. You leave one ritual incomplete, she says quietly, the ritual of law. Mallory secures Whitfield and Crane in separate cells. He examines the crypt, 6 niches once empty, now filled by tragedy and deceit. He photographs the evidence. Above, the organ's final note fades. Mallory ascends to the nave, lantern in hand. He surveys the stained glass windows, each pane shattered by unseen force, shards glittering like accusations. He turns to Carter. The Reaper's legacy ends here. She nods, and the petals won't bloom again. Together, they lock the chest and seal the crypt door, leaving behind only echoes in the stone corridor. Dawn's pale light filters through shattered stained glass windows at St. Mary's Church, casting fractured hues upon the stone floor. Detective Inspector Arthur Mallory stands in the empty nave, his overcoat heavy with the damp chill of the crypt below. Beside him, Sergeant Helen Carter and Constable Edward Briers gather the final pieces of the grim puzzle, the identities of the Black Rose Reaper's puppeteers, their motives laid bare. By mid-morning, Dr. Edmund Hale's former housekeeper, Mrs. Agnes Price, identifies both Reverend Jonathan Whitfield and Reverend Jonathan Crane in a lineup at Lambeth Police Station. Her voice trembles as she recounts Whitfield's midnight rituals, how he whispered arcane phrases, urging Hale's hand to cut away the rot. Crane's confession follows. He admits to luring the victims from hospital wards, feeding Hale names and locations under the guise of pastoral care. In return, Whitfield and Crane received sacrifices to burnish their spiritual authority over the working poor. In a hastily convened hearing, Whitfield's defense collapses under the weight of evidence. The morgue keys, the silk thorns, the hop vine diagrams in his own hand. Crane, muttering of penance, pleads guilty to accessory before the fact. Both are remanded until trial. At the Old Bailey, Crown Prosecutor Whitaker presents the church crypt as exhibit A slides of the broken circle drawn in mortar, photographs of Hale's instruments and Vance's through the keyhole footprints. Whitfield's chilling, calm in court contrasts with Crane's tearful remorse. They are found guilty. Whitfield's sentenced to life imprisonment, Crane to 10 years penal servitude. Dr. Hale, serving his term for accessory, watches from prison gray stone windows, his hands shackled to a slate table. He shows no emotion as Mallory's report arrives, Vance's wounds sealed, the final cipher decoded, the mechanism of terror laid bare. Hale gazes at the letter. Fragment, the blade must dance, and bows his head, perhaps in regret or relief. Some months later, Mallory visits Winter Hollow Farm, now a fenced memorial of 6 black roses planted at each hay mound. He places a wreath of fresh white roses, their petals stark against the dark soil. Sergeant Carter stands with him, eyes on the ribbon reading in memory of the Hawthorne family. Mallory kneels by the first rose. They found justice, he says softly, not by ritual, but by law. Carter adjusts her cap. Here the petals lie in peace. At the farm's edge, Constable Briers uncovers one last footprint, a single bare impression in the mud, shallow and fragile. It glistens in the sunrise, and then vanishes as the earth absorbs the warmth. They leave without a word. London's gas lamps no longer flicker with fear when the clock strikes 3. The Black Rose Reaper's name fades from headlines, replaced by new scandals and mysteries. Yet among true crime circles, the case endures as a study in obsession and betrayal, how faith twisted into fanaticism, how a healer became a butcher, and how vengeance was cloaked in ritual. Inspector Mallory files his final report under closed cases, yet carries the manuscript of Requiem for the Rose in his desk drawer. Late at night, When the wind rattles his window panes, he reads the pages by lamplight, reminding himself of the delicate boundary between order and chaos. As the train carries Mallory away from London toward a new assignment, he gazes at the emerging dawn across countryside fields. Somewhere in those rolling hills, footprints will form, petals will fall, and a new story will cry out for justice. He steels himself, knowing that every case ends with unanswered questions, and that sometimes the quiet between petals holds the loudest secrets. Thank you for following Footprints in the Frost, the Winter Hollow Murders on Trace Hunt Radio. Stay vigilant, sometimes the darkest truths bloom where least expected.